Welcome to the Existentialist Society in Melbourne, Australia. I'm David Miller. I'm the Secretary of the Existentialist Society. Our speaker today, I'm pausing because I don't think we are recording. Let me try again to get us
It is.
It's being recorded. Yeah, it's all good.
It is being recorded, is it? Oh, well.
Yeah.
I'm not getting the sign on my screen. Okay, well, our speaker today is Dr. Valery Vinogradovs, and his topic is Albert Camus on poverty. Over to you, Valery.
Thanks so much, David. I really appreciate you having me at the Existentialist Society again, no matter what. And when David and I briefly discussed what I could present this year, I had two options. In fact, I had one option to begin with. I thought I would talk to you about passages in Michel de Montaigne and Albert Camus, where they directly talk to the reader. You know, contemporary philosophy, is famous for being abstract, and hardly ever you hear examples in professional scholarship that actually refer to you, or that, or a style of conversation or an analysis that is directed to you. So I thought it was really, really interesting because they don't do it often, and they do it for rhetorical purposes. But then I started teaching a 12-week course on Camus, and I thought that there could be nothing more important in terms of what I can offer for David and for you than Albert Camus on the question of poverty. So to begin with, let me just try to quickly make sure that I share the right screen with you. And as long as you can see these slides, we can just move on. And I will have my little note on my side and the slides for you. And so long as it's working, everything's going to be great. So let's see. Yeah, there you go. All right. Can you hear me well, and can you see?
Yes, we can.
Screen?
Yes.
Oh, all right. Nice. Okay. Okay. So as I said, what I would like to do today is to talk about Albert Camus' views on poverty. And Albert Camus is extremely prolific, extremely gifted. As you know, his stylistic preferences and aptitudes as an author, in my opinion, are unsurpassable in the 20th century. So he was a master of like a criminal reportage, if you like, during the Second World War. He was obviously a novel writer, playwright, a bit of a poet, philosopher, and he was delivering absolutely amazing lectures after the end of the Second World War, and after being given the Nobel Prize. Next day he was giving another lecture, and as a teacher, even though he was not like employed as an academic or as a teacher, his teaching capacities were absolutely incredible. So this is just to say that there's so much material to draw from, even though his life, as you all know, untimely ended when he was only 48 in 1960. Over the course of his life, short life, he just produced so much. So what I would like to do is this. So Camus dies in a car crash, absolutely suddenly, and next to the car crash, just in some, you know, in some matter nearby, and here's the picture for you of how it looked like roughly. Next to it, serendipitously, by means of fate, was found a gift to us. It is Camus' last unfinished autobiographical novel or fictional autobiography. You know, you can come up with all kinds of genres for that kind of work. It's a singular work that I can't really compare with anything, particularly with respect to the Western philosophical or literary tradition. It's a very anti-colonial work of literature and philosophy, if you like. And here Camus is, it's a first draft, it's raw material, and it's magnificent. Camus is struggling to reconcile himself with his family, with his childhood, and Adam's poverty. So Camus' own self, his own formative years over the course of his life, and up until his very death, were defined by living poorly, if you like. And so, again, one, you know, a kind of academic scholar, I guess, would be inclined to drill into all of his works and, you know, find views on this or that. But I think for our purposes right now, and the purposes, I think, is not to raise awareness about poverty. Everyone knows about it. You know, it's right next to you in whichever country you live. It's horrible here, livable there, and so on and so on and so on. So it's not about really raising awareness, and I don't think academic literature can really change or move anything. So my question is about moving. And as Camus, you know, resistance, rebellion, and things like that, they're often about passion, and passion is about being able to be moved and to move. And so for those reasons, what I would like to do is to look at Camus' autobiographical text, where he shares with us his own story of poverty. And as we're going to learn, what makes it so fascinating is that it breaks through, it cuts through all kinds of fears and prejudices people have against simple life or poor life, if you like. And obviously, at the same time, he exposes all kinds of forms of trauma that can be inflicted when people live in dire need. Okay, so these are roughly our goals. So if you could give me just 15 seconds, I'll clear that water out here and we'll continue. All right. Okay. This work is remarkable. The First Man is remarkable for a number of reasons, and as I noted, that I think it is, in terms of, I guess, style, singular or unsurpassable as far as I know, you know, the history of autobiographical thought to begin with. And what makes it so special is the mystery that surrounds his background, and the veil of mystery that is shrouded by extremely poor conditions in which they found themselves in Algeria in early 20th century. Stylistically, and so that Camus undertakes detective-like investigations into his ancestry, into his background, despite the the resistance of this poor heritage, where everything essentially is a kind of oblivion. When you don't really have any memories of yourself, where do you come from? Who do you belong to? Do you belong here? And what is actually happening in the neighbor's house? So he entwines those detective-like investigations with, his living memories of his relatives, his close relatives, of his household environment, and things like that. And they're living memories. So he's shaping memories as he's thinking through them as a mature man. And most interestingly, again, because we are dealing with raw material, there are lots of kind of fleeting, quite impressive, splendid thoughts that we possibly wouldn't see had Camus had the time to finish the work. So this is just quickly to introduce the work and to say that I love it a lot. I think it deserves much more attention than it has received, and certainly much more than certain works of Camus that we can still find in anyone's library, like The Insider, the Chiles. Camus grew up a lot, throughout 40s and 50s, thanks to the Second World War, through all kinds of personal conflicts and altercations, such as with the kind of elite Parisian intelligentsia and so on and so on. So he, we see here raw Camus, if you like, who is struggling to write at this point in his life. He's struggling to write because his home in Algeria has been torn apart by the civil war and the war against the colonizers, and Camus famously was very silent on what was happening because he couldn't reconcile his kind of grassroots anarchistic sensibilities and inclinations with the brutal world in which he was living. And so he's torn apart by all those events, and he's struggling to write, and he's looking for a medium to express himself at that point in time, late 50s, early 60s, and this is the work that we have. It wasn't published until 1994, where Camus' daughter, Catherine, published it in, as I said, in 1994. They were reluctant to publish it in the form that it is, and bless them for what they did, because, as I said, I think it is a magnificent piece of literature and philosophy. Okay, let us continue then. So this is a little line from the novel. It's an, I think, nice, kind of compelling way to open it up. Jacques had grown up in the midst of poverty, naked as death, among things named with common names. So to say that Camus' familiarity with all kinds of possible early struggles in your life that you can have were visceral. And so my approach in what follows is to give Camus as much voice as possible. I will have some marginal notes and commentaries to add every now and then, but in general, Camus offers us so much wealth of insight and wisdom about the poverty as a kind of a social and cross-cultural phenomenon, and I think he just deserves attention what he says. And so I guess my critical contribution will be more not in terms of my kind of a playful comments, but more in terms of how the following passages are arranged, because still it's a standard book more or less that we have. And so what I've done, I have just taking out, it's like a glass bead game, if you like. I have just taken out little bits and pieces that deal directly or indirectly with poetry, and created this little string for you, if you like. So Camus was born in 1913. It grew up in the Belcourt section, Algiers, in a French colony. And he grew up in a poor working class environment. So that's one of the reasons why for Camus it was interesting and in many ways disgusting to engage with elite socialist philosophers of his time in 40s and 50s who grew up in prestigious neighborhoods, who got all of that elite education, while he was actually coming from the working class, and he knew the struggles inside out rather than just a high-flowing abstract. So they all lived in a two-room apartment. Camus' older brother is Ian, Rico's uncle, who we'll mention for sure, his grandmother and mother. He knew his mom, Catherine, his whole life. She actually passed away 6 months after Camus' untimely death. And Camus never knew his own father, who died in the First World War when Camus was 1 year old. So Camus has no living memories of his father. And this book, The First Man, is in a nutshell obviously a search of Camus' own self, but it is performed, if you like, by way of looking for the father figure. I will give you some evidence a little bit later on. All I wanted to say in a word is that The First Man tells us stories of Jacques Cormery, which is, I guess, Albert Camus, a fictional version.
Sorry, it sounds like your mic is breaking up, and it's very hard to hear you.
Okay, thanks. Is it okay now?
Kind of. There's still a bit of static in the background, and I'm not sure what's going on with the reception on your end.
It's most likely it's not the reception. It's just water is creeping into my laptop from all the sides, and I have covered it up in jacket and things. So I can try if you like to. Does that sound better?
Yeah,
Yes.
much better. Much better.
Yes.
All right. Oh, thanks. Thanks. I appreciate it. Well, then I'm just taking these headphones off and using the inbuilt speaker. Thanks for that. So this is just to say that, again, we hear stories about Jacques, who is Albert Camus himself, being shaped up in this broken milieu. And perhaps the most important maxim I can offer for you here is that they had nothing, and Camus grew up having nothing to lose whatsoever but his own life. Okay, so in what follows, please let me offer you a few snippets depicting the environment, the most direct physical environment around his home, including, like, architectural details and just rubbish and clutter lying around. Weather or the mood did not lend itself to first gather in the hall of Jacques' house. From there, they went out of the back door and down into a small yard enclosed on 3 sides by the walls of the houses. On the 4th side, a big orange tree stretched its branches over a garden wall. When it was in flower, its scent rose alongside the wretched houses, drifting through the hall down a small flight of stone stairs to the yard. Finally, on the 4th side, the black most of the building cellar gaped on either side of the stairs. Caverns without exit or lighting, cut into the earth itself, without any partitions, sweating with humidity, reached by the 4 steps covered with green mold, where the tenants piled at random their surplus possessions. That is almost nothing. Old sacks were rotting there, scraps of chests, rusty old wash basins with holes in them, things you find lying around on waste ground that even the poorest have no use for. It was there in one of those cellars that the children would gather. So this is just to illustrate the this setting. I think it's very important because I agree with a series of considerate and child attentive thinkers and artists, particularly in the last 100 years or so. Your childhood days can fill you up with warmth, with light, with with the sun and care, or with the absence of thereof. And what makes Camus so amazing is that in this kind of ruinous, decrepit, poor, with marks of true happiness and joy. And in general, Camus is a master of showing how ugliness that decay brings along can coexist with beauty and vitality. That is, if there are at least some orange trees around. And that's why often when I read Camus, I have no clue whether the narration is gonna go some, beautiful, sublime, kind of a sacred direction, or it's gonna talk about something banal in a beautiful, unexpected way, or it will end up in some brutal act. And that's what makes Camus so amazing. All right, here's some more from the background, and here's another story when otherwise, in Dostoevsky, for example, who Camus was a great fan of, a story like this would go in a very different direction. But here's what Camus is doing with this living memory of his. First, the boys would wander through the arcades and inside courtyards. They would encounter the disabled veterans, some missing an arm or a leg, others installed in little carts with bicycle wheels. There were no disfigured or blind men, only cripples. They were neatly dressed, often wearing a medal, the sleeve of the shirt or jacket, or the trouser leg, carefully taken up and fastened with a safety pin around the invisible. There were so many of them. Some of the men were close-mouthed and somber, it's true, but most were young, smiling, and even joked about their disability. I only have one leg, one of them would say. He was blond, with a strong, square face, and radiantly healthy. They often saw him prowling around the laundry. But I can still give you a kick in the ass. So I think it's very great. And to me, it was, if you like, was quite healing to read this around, or this kind of account, this kind of memory by Camus, because it is still life affirming, if you like. You can see that Camus loves life no matter what. And for about 8 years in my life, I used to live in St. Petersburg, Russia, you know, the home of Dostoevsky and so on. And there are war veterans everywhere, particularly on like public transport in the subway. You can see a lot of them screeching on their trolleys, having no legs, having no money, used and abandoned by the state and their own society. So these are my memories. So for me, it was again reassuring and kind of just gave me some vitality, if you like, reading these lines in Camus, because there is that side as well. But just to give you a good example of how actually poor they were in terms of, for example, just providing sustenance, food for themselves, here's one example. Okay. Every day during this season, a French fries peddler would start up his stove. Seldom did the little group have even the price of a single paper cornet of frayed potatoes. If by any chance one of them had the required coin, he would buy his twist, march solemnly to the beach, followed respectfully by the retinue of his comrades, and in the shade of an old derelict barge by the sea, he would set his feet in the sand and drop to a sitting position while holding his twist vertical in one hand and covered with the other, to make sure that he did not lose a single one of his crusty fries. The custom was that he would then give his comrades one fry apiece, and they would reverently savor the single tidbit, hot and smelling of strong oil, that he permitted them. They would watch while the favored boy gravely relished the remaining fries one by one. There were always crumbs left at the bottom of the paper twist, which they would implore the glutted owner to share. Most of the time, unless it was Jean, he would unfold the oily paper, spread out the potato crumbs, and authorize them to take a single crumb each. All it took then was a eeny, meeny, miny, moo to decide who would go first and thus get the biggest crumb. So again, what I would like to emphasize is the visceral presence of the dire need, but at the same time, what Camus is contesting, if you like, between the lines is that such experiences are devoid of pleasure, of playfulness and joy. No, that's one of the strong points Camus wants to communicate, again, to break through all kinds of prejudices that certainly cripple vastly developed capitalist societies that are driven by money, that are driven by the pursuit of money, and where in societies where money and possessions give people a sense of worth, to those people, Albert Camus offers an alternative. The problem is that it's extremely hard to carve out a sense of dignity and self-worth in those conditions. But hey, in the world where we live, given the education that people receive these days, particularly state education, though I'm not particularly, super fond of the contemporary academic education, which is also, again, career, money-oriented, prestige-oriented, and so on. In those areas, I think it's also hard to find righteous grounds for self-worth and self-esteem too. All right, let's move on. Sorry, it's all very wet and the mouse is not working. Oh, there you go. There you go. And here's another kind of simple moment in life that hopefully something can, and hopefully all of us can recall something comparable. But again, contemporary big city existence and ways of life, they are not particularly conducive to having wild, joyous experiences in nature. And luckily, in Algiers there was water and the sand. But living in the city, it's hard to get access to those kind of very full-blown, joyous, happy, sacred moments in life. And again, these are those moments that fill a child that soon turns into a teenager and keeps growing. And some of us always stay teenagers, in my opinion. But this is that, that energy, if you like, that light that can have a lot of meaning for one's life that follows. And it's certainly the case of Albert Camus. In a few seconds, they were naked. A moment later, in the water, swimming with clumsy vigor, shouting, drooling, and spitting, daring each other to dive or vying who could stay underwater the longest. The sea was gentle and warm. The sun fell lightly on their soaked heads, and the glory of the light filled their young bodies with a joy that made them cry out incessantly. They reigned over life and over the sea, and like nobles certain that their riches with limitless these world's offerings. So if you have read a little bit of Albert Camus, whether it's his early really lyrical essays, whether it's his famous novels or his personal notes, the appreciation of the sacredness and vitality of nature bleeds through, runs through his whole life, thanks to experiences like that. So we find similar passages in Camus writing in 1935, 41, 42, and at the very end of his life. Again, in terms of anti-colonial studies, Albert Camus once again is showing to us how different he is to of his time, if you like. So there is this. He's strongly drawn to Algiers. He prefers Algiers to Paris. It's sacred for him. It's his home. He can't live without these life-affirming experiences in nature, and in the end, moments like that and brief moments of camaraderie and solidarity over the course of his life have made it worthwhile for him. And so these moments, however trite they may sound, he was just enjoying the sunset. No, it's a question of whether you can take it in or not. These days, at the sunset, they take pictures of themselves against the sunset, or take pictures of the sunset and make sure that the picture is cool. It's very different from being able, like Albert Camus, the child, cry out incessantly because the life is flowing through them over the course of their lives. All right. I will, from your permission, skip the next one, simply because it will be too much, but that poverty made Albert Camus, the child in those dire conditions, to his militant grandmother that he didn't steal the money, and he stole the money to go watch soccer next day. So there were simple things that the child could not allow himself, and he knew it was wrong. He didn't want to do it, but he still did it because he really wanted to watch soccer. So this is just to foreground one of the kind of domestic problems in terms of, like, if you like, social philosophy, a problem that is bred through poor lives, through poverty that corrodes family relations. Here, the child doesn't get the opportunity to do the thing that he likes the most in the world, which is to play soccer, and he was the king. As he said, he was good at it, and he had to steal. In fact, when I was reading that again, I also remembered that a couple of times I pinched some money from my grandma as well, but I was pinching them first. I think I was roughly the same age. I would have been 8 or 9, and it was the post-Soviet space. It was really bleak. It was Latvia, so it was the most European part of the Soviet Union, if you like. It was really fucked up, so sorry for the language. And I really wanted to have a poster, a cheap poster of my favorite basketball player on one occasion, and I did it. I knew it was wrong, but I still did it because I wanted it so much. On the other occasion, I really wanted to buy a girl some pastry in the cafe on the premises of my school, and I knew that I wouldn't have the money for that, and I really wanted to do it, and I did it. So, so this is for everyone who can, I guess, relate to Camus in this sense. The part that, however, it's important to read out for you, obviously, and now we go through certain, as I said, social issues that are caused by poverty, or to dig it deeper, caused by unjust, often racial conditions in a given country, which discriminates against whole classes and types of citizens, if you like. And the issue here is that of holidays. So, right, one of the greatest achievements of the last 100 years or so is the 5-day working day. In the West, at least, 5-day working day, 40 hours a week. You can have don't have to work 7 days a week if you like. You have your weekends, and you are if you're officially employed, you are entitled to a little holiday. So this is a novelty of as of late, comparably speaking. If we talk about anthropology, it's very, very, very new. So it's a great, interesting Western achievement. People are very proud of it, right? And on one hand, of course, it's true, we are supposed to be proud of it. On the other hand, of course, it doesn't mean that we know what to do with our free time. And this free time that we deserve, that we work hard towards to afford the things that we want to have in our lives, and so on, can be easily hijacked by trivial and empty pursuits, which, if anything, can resemble rest rather than leisure. And leisure, obviously, is an active, creative passing of free time, but I think culturally or globally, we're so far away from orienting our values and rights in the right direction that we'll never be able to figure it out and just keep being proud about working hard lawfully. But on the other side of things, obviously, there's many dimensions to that. But obviously, there's a deeply negative one, and Albert Camus accentuated, and I would like to read it out for you. And he's showing why people wouldn't have holidays and how that is connected with poverty and death. No one in his home had a holiday. The men worked the year round without respite. Only an accident at work, when they were employed by firms that had insured them against such risk, could give them any time off. And the holiday came by way of the hospital or the doctor. For example, Uncle Ernest, so it's Camus' very influential, crippled little bit uncle on mom's brother, one time when he felt worn out, had put himself on insurance, as he said, by deliberately shaving a thick slice of meat off his palm with a plane. As for the wives, and Catherine Cormery, which is his mom, they worked without a break for the good reason that a rest meant poorer meals for all of them. Unemployment, for which there was no insurance at all, was the calamity they most dreaded. So there would be no food. That explains why these workers in Pierre's home or in Jacques, Pierre is Camus' friend, who in their daily lives were the most tolerant of men, were always xenophobes on labor issues, accusing in turn the Italians, the Spaniards, the Jews, the Arabs, and finally the whole world for stealing their work. An attitude that is certainly disconcerting to those intellectuals who theorize about the proletariat, and yet very human and surely excusable. It was not for mastery of the earth or the privileges of wealth and leisure that these unexpected nationalists were contending against other nationalities. It was for the privilege of servitude. Work in this neighborhood was not a virtue, but a necessity that, in order to survive, led to death. So, I think this well illustrates a number of conditions to which Albert Camus was subjected growing up. So he was in dire need all the time. When he wanted to go from school to Lyceum, which he in the end did, first his grandma told him that it's not possible because they're poor, and his teacher stepped in and met his grandmother in person and persuaded her that so this is great. I wish to thank to all those teachers who found the courage to persuade those people who are steeped in poor ways to try to follow their dreams. What a gift is that, of course. Okay, so in the next part, I will quickly read you a story of about each of his family members, so his ties become with them and with his milieu become more tangible, if you like. And we'll finish with his searches for the dead father that he never met, and the searches through which nonetheless he has become the man he is. So if you're familiar with the Nietzschean categories, it's all there. Nietzsche, all through his life, was most heavily influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche, but in his own way. He was influenced by him, not more than that. So first significant figure in his life that we're going to have a look at is his mother. Won't have the time to read the material on the left, but his mom was, had some issue, and she was deaf. and couldn't really hear well. She was illiterate. She couldn't read, and the limits of her world were quite tangible too. So this is one passage from Camus. His mother, who had no idea what history and geography might be, who knew only that she lived on land near the sea, that France was on the other side of that sea, which she too had to never travel. France, in any case, being an obscure place, lost in a dim night which one reached through a port named Marseille, which she pictured like the port of Algiers, where there was a shining city they said was very beautiful and was called Paris, where there was also a region named Alsace that her husband's family came from. It was a long time ago. There were fleeing enemies called Germans to be taken back from those same enemies who were always evil and cruel, especially with the French, and for no reason at all. In any case, it was not far away from where her own family, natives of Mahon, had immigrated so long ago as her husband's family to come to Algeria, because they were dying of hunger in Mahon, and she did not even know that it was on an island, not knowing anyway what an island was, for she had never seen one. So we must remember that the limits of one's world, of one's interests, of one's feelings, conceptions, one's worldview is definitive for those people around them. That's why, to use very simple language, when two strong worldviews do not overlap in one way or another, when there's no connection points, if you like, or connection spheres, there is misunderstanding, like one of Camus' plays. There's hatred, there is, uh, shame, bigotry, and silence of all kinds as well. And this is the kind of environment that Camus was shaped by. So her mother, in the kind of a, if you like, cultured sense, was completely illiterate. She had no idea what was her place in this world, which makes Camus to use and provide a fascinating reflection, phenomenological reflection on the memories of the poor. So let me remind you that Camus is trying to track down as much more or less reliable material about his family's background and about their stories, which is not primarily through formal learning and professional work, but when you just try to figure things out with yourself in this world by means of those people who are the closest to you. And we must remember always one of the wisest persons and humblest persons who's ever lived, Michel de Montaigne, who says that to get along, something along the lines of that, to get along with the closest people to you is the most difficult thing. And so for all those political theorists out there, obviously the conundrum is that if we in reality, all of us, most of us, great majority of us, struggle to reconcile ourselves with our close and distant family members, on what grounds do we fantasize about social, national, and global thriving? On spurious grounds which have no foundation. So let's go back to Camus. Poor people's memory is less nourished than that of the rich. It has fewer landmarks in space because they seldom leave the place where they live, and fewer reference points in time throughout lives that they are gray and featureless. Of course, There is the memory of the heart that they say is the surest kind. But the heart wears out with sorrow and labor. It forgets sooner under the weight of fatigue. Remembrance of things past is just for the rich. For the poor, it only marks the faint traces on the path to death. And besides, in order to bear up well, one must not remember too much, but rather stick close to the passing day, hour by hour, as his mother did, somewhat by necessity, no doubt. So it's not so, it's, it's not a coincidence that I mentioned Nietzsche a little bit earlier, and again, Nietzsche he's in the most direct way. And remember that one of the most open-ended and cosmic ideas in Nietzsche, namely that human the idea of atavism, it's the idea that human beings are just the clusters of memory and energies and errors through running our on and so on. So it's very, this, in my opinion, is that, so how do then I find those affinities, those connections, those threads between myself and things that make me me, things that possibly are not here in time as such, but they're part of me. So Nietzsche, incites us to be much more than we are and much more in line and worlds demandable. Mother and to lie or occupy a niche on a different side of the spectrum, where it's not that you are remembering memories and reliving memories and creating feelings and worlds peace. No, it's kind of on the contrary. You just focus on the passing flow of things in hope that tomorrow it will.
Well, none of that's going to appeal to the Roman Empire.
Yes, it seems that we've lost Valery.
Valery is here. We just lost his voice.
Well,
Yeah, he's muted.
He's muted himself.
he's back.
I'm back. Sorry for that. So again, I won't go through the reasons for this setup again. So this is his mother. It's absolutely essential to pay homage to Albert Camus' uncle, his mother's brother, living together. Fascinating figure in his life. He's almost like a kind of Diogenes character, but from an early short story by Chekhov. He's so unreal that I can't believe that he was real. And here's just one story about Etienne. So he's Ernest. Ernest is his, I guess, fictional name for the novel. Etienne is his real name. Ernest would often take the child with him, just to take him out. His energy and vitality, finding no outlet in speech or in the complex relations of social life, would explode in his physical life and its sensations. So he couldn't speak. So he had, again, it wouldn't do any justice to him if I were to try to categorize and narrow him down by means of handy psychiatric categories at our disposal in 2023. So he was special. He was a holy fool of sorts, if you like to go a little bit deeper into our kind of archaeology of human types. Now, now it's all medical discourse, but back in the days, he would be called a holy fool of sorts, but he was special, there was nothing like him. Even on awakening, when someone shook him out of the hermetic sleep of the deaf, he would rear up wild-eyed, bellowing, like a prehistoric beast that wakens each day to a strange and hostile world. But once he was awake, his body and its functioning made him secure on his feet. Despite the hard labor of his job as a cooper, he liked to go swimming and hunting. When Jacques was still a child, his uncle would take him to Sablides Beach, make him get up on his back, and immediately set out to the sea with a rudimentary but powerful stroke, making inarticulate sounds that translated first his surprise at the coldness of the water, then his pleasure at being there, and his anger at an errant wave. "You're not scared?" he would say from time to time to Jacques. Yes, he was afraid, but didn't say so. He was spellbound by the solitude. So this is just, it makes me thinking a lot about role models. It's not even the language that I want to use. Exemplars or examples of how and what it is to be human being in our lives. Again, as I said, some people get lucky. Some people get gifted parents who actually care about them more rather than about their profession, which is not common these days. But some people do, luckily. Where do we get unusual examples of humanity to share with our kids? Our friends who are busy with work as well, or our friends intellectuals who have no idea how to be playful? So Camus was extremely lucky because, as I said, his father was dead, his older brother was young, his mom was poor and couldn't talk, and the limits of her world were almost limited by her laundry work and the walls of her house. Her grandma, to which we will touch on her very shortly, was very austere, militant, and gave him little love. And he has this uncle, the holy fool, who is deaf, who can't speak, but he's completely full of magic. He was the person who sparked Camus' imagination, as well as his mental and somatic intelligence. And again, we can try to track down the roots of our education to formal things like education, diplomas you got, but you can't replace this kind of education with anything else. So here's one more recollection about Uncle Etienne. It's this one is just pure gold. In a sense, she, Camus' mother, was less involved in life than her brother Ernest, who lived with them. He was stone deaf, and he expressed himself as much as
onomatopoetic sounds and gestures as with 100-odd words at his disposal. But Ernest, who could not be put out to work when he was young, had haphazardly attended school and learned to make out the letters of the alphabet. He did go to the cinema sometimes, and he would come home with an account of the film that astounded those who had already seen it, as the wealth of his imagination would make up for what he had missed. Moreover, he was shrewd and crafty, and a sort of native intelligence enabled him to make his way in the world among people who nonetheless remained obdurately silent to him. You know how we feel awkward? Do you feel awkward when you see, if you ever see on public transport, people who do not stare into the phone, but actually look around them with this kind of a funny look, and you think like, who is this guy? Like, why is he looking into my eyes? Why is he even trying to talk to me? So Camus is decolonizing these kind of colonial tropes where we see people through medical lenses rather than through clear, personal, human lenses, where people like that may appear to represent much more humanity than just regular office workers, in my opinion. Thanks to the same intelligence, he would bury himself every day in the newspaper, where he could make out the headlines and so have at least a nodding acquaintance with world affairs. Hitler, he would say, for example, to Jacques when he had come of age, no good. No, that wasn't good. So again, I come from a country which was certainly subjected to these kind of tropes, where people like Ernest and like the uncle on my mom's side, who are different to everyone else, and because they're different and because we are so narrow-minded, we can't include them playfully and open-endedly in our world, so they become a part of it, and so they enrich it by their own difference, by their own otherness. Instead, we create these great nation states that, in case of Russia, just seclude them from the rest of the world, not even giving them opportunities to use public transport and so on. That's on one hand. On the other hand, we brand them. We create these fancy neoliberal, pseudo-inclusive conceptions to include them in our world while still harboring these shitty colonial feelings about them not being normal. And so for that reason, because Etienne was misunderstood and socially disadvantaged throughout his life, Camus mentions on a number of occasions situations where he would be beside himself, when he would lose control, he would be angry, furious, and do things that you don't want your children to see in your domestic environment. So violence. There was violence, at times very unpleasant, brutal, emotional, physical violence in Camus' household, which is obviously one of the more devastating, damaging symptoms of local and global poverty. But Camus says persistently, and we may use this quote a little bit later on, that you can't blame them for doing that. And Camus gives a good reason. So let me give you one little example and introduce us to Camus' grandmother, who was the matriarch in the household. All decisions concerning clothing, spending money, education, groceries, all of these things had to go through Camus' grandmother first. So it was a hierarchical, matriarchal background. Okay, let me try to flick it. So I just can't even see my mouse. Here, where is it? So just give me a second. My hands are wet and I can't use the touchpad.
Well, it looks as though Valery's connection
All good?
has failed again.
No, he's here. He's here.
I'm back. All right.
Good.
So here is the story about, and to introduce his grandmother. So the grandmother was really kind to Ernest, to her son, so and Camus' uncle. The grandmother never responded to her youngest child's anger. On the one hand, because she knew it was useless. On the other, because she had always had an odd weakness for him. With Jacques, once he had done some reading attributed to the fact that Ernest was handicapped, though we have so many examples of parents who, despite our preconceptions, will turn away from the handicapped child, and which he better understood one day much later when, catching a tenderness he had never seen in his grandmother's unusually hard eyes, he turned to see his uncle putting on the jacket of his Sunday outfit. The dark cloth made him look even more slender. His features were delicate and youthful. He was freshly shaved and his hair carefully combed. And for once, he was wearing a fresh collar and a tie. He had the look of a Greek shepherd in holiday dress. And Jacques saw his uncle as he really was, which was very handsome. And then he understood that his grandmother's love for her son was physical, that like everyone, she was in love with the grace and strength of Ernest. So in the eyes of some people, it's the handicapped, disabled, or any other euphemisms person. In the eyes, in the eyes of Camus, his uncle is a Greek shepherd in holiday dress. And if you ask me, I will prefer the company of a Greek shepherd in a holiday dress to a company of a Greek king every day. Overall, as I said, the source household can be attributed to the matriarch, to the grandmother, whose life was damn hard. When someone's death was reported in the grandmother's presence, well, she would say, he'll fart no more. She had seen many die around her, 2 of her children, her husband, her son-in-law, and all her nephews in the war. But that was just it. She was as familiar with death as she was with work or poverty. She did not think about it, but in some sense lived it. And besides, the needs of the moment were even more urgent for her than they were for Algerians as a whole, who, by their daily cares and their common lot, were denied the funerary piety that flourishes in civilizations at their height. Death for them was an ordeal to be faced, as they had faced those that preceded it, which they never spoke of, where they tried to show the courage that for them was a man's principal virtue. But meanwhile, one tried to forget it or push it aside. So I would like to draw your attention to Camus putting in the same line death, work, and poverty. So in many ways, this trinity, if you like, this is the bloody triangle of suffering in their family, and they were all, to, I guess, to invert somewhat, or to use mockingly Heidegger's term, they were literally, their life and their being was that of towards the death, or actually facing death in the everyday, because you could still, I guess, feel in some sense its marks and vestiges and hues in the work that you do, and just in the everyday struggles. There is a great story that I don't have the time for, of Camus' mother trying to get out of property, or the consciousness of the poor, by doing a new haircut. So they all used to have, his mother and his grandma, like old school long ponytails, and she wanted to do something fresh and stylish. I guess she wanted to feel, she was very beautiful, I guess she wanted to feel fresh and beautiful, freshly beautiful in her eyes again, for everyone else in the household. And the story goes is that her grandma told her that she looks like a whore, and she cried all through the night with Camus, with his tears of love and sorrow, as he put it. And later, on the next day, his mom came back dressing same gray clothing that she had, with kind of a modest, regular hair. And Camus said that ever since then, her mom sat in her poor ways forever. Obviously, it is horrible, because, you know, it's a great story showing that there are still strivings, yearnings, if you like, but unfortunately, within the domestic environments where things reign, that have been reigning for generations, sometimes it's hard to think differently and to be different. And Camus comments on that and says, Jacques knew that if the poverty, the infirmities, the elemental need in which all of his family lived did not excuse everything, in any case, they made it impossible to pass judgment on those who were its victims. So his family, Camus, is the victim, and, as I have already shown you, in a sense, a beneficiary of a poor lifestyle. On the darker side of things, they hurt each other without wanting to, just because each represented to others the cruel and demanding necessity of their lives. So these are obviously very familiar kind of a tropes. If you know, one can see strong parallels here between Dostoevsky, obviously, who writes a lot about poor people. You know, it's the title of his first book, called Poor People, published when he was still young, before his mock execution. And kind of Camus, I think, develops on Dostoevskian motifs here, in a sense. But the issue is still, if it's still the same. You know, if you are born in such a situation, or if you know someone who is in such a situation, the question is, on what grounds do we pass the judgment on the victim? Okay. No, I won't read this one. Let's go and move to Father. There's one another little story that I'll say briefly in a nutshell before moving on to Father, is that while being in Lyceum, Camus started working for the first time as a clerk. So it's like a little commercial business. And he found very empty and devoid of any meaning in joy, even though he had some spare money to help his family. And nonetheless, he was very insightful already back then and skeptical about his colleagues who could only define themselves, as he puts it, spare relation to the authority. So they were not autonomous, independent people. They could only assert who they are in the office and the position they occupy in this working space. So for Camus, they were all full of shit. His father, on the other hand, was a real mystery. So, as I mentioned a number of times, Camus constantly is more as Camus undertakes this investigation into his ancestry, into himself. He realizes that all close relatives are actually dead, and there's really no one to talk about except for his mom and just a couple of random people he comes across in the course of the book. Here's one a good passage. No one never ever talked about them. Neither his mother nor his uncle ever spoke of the departed relatives, nor of the father whose traces he was seeking, nor of the others. They went on living in poverty, though they were no longer in need, but they were set in their ways, and they looked on life with a resigned suspicion. They loved it as animals do, but they knew from experience that it would regularly give birth to disaster without even showing any sign that it was carrying it. And then the way these two were with him, silent and drawn in on themselves, empty of memories and only holding on to a few blurred images. They live now in proximity to death, that is always in the present. Never would he learn from them who his father had been, and even though by their presence alone they reopened springs within him, reaching back to his poor and happy childhood. So again, I would like you to take this on board. The soul, one of the main purposes for Camus to explore his ancestry and his family is that so that he can open sources within himself that he was not aware of, the sources that now define him and complete him as a fractured man, essentially. He could not be sure whether these very rich memories gushing out of him were really faithful to the child he had been. It was far more certain, on the contrary, that he was left with 2 or 3 favorite pictures that joined him to them, made him one with anonymous being that for so many years had survived through his family and that made him truly distinctive. So his dad was a poor, righteous man. There's a few interesting stories about his dad that Camus learned much later in his life. He learned about where his dad saw atrocious cruelties done to captives, and he said, like, this is not war and this is not human whatsoever. So for Camus, this story meant a lot because it solidified his faith in himself and his own righteousness. Remember that one of the definitive characteristics of Camus' philosophy is resistance to evil, violence, and cruelty. He was going out of his way always to find a peaceful reconciliation and to spare human lives and human suffering, essentially. So for him, it was really reassuring to learn that his own father, whom he never knew, actually was cruelties that we can do to one another. And yet his father was, as Camus puts it, was the first man. So you could say, there's a bit of an ambiguity, because the first man is his father, because he is the first wave of migrants in Algiers. He had no memories, no past, and no future at the same time. So in a sense, even Camus directly calls his father the first man. On the other hand, because we don't really know much about this father, and because this father in a way lives now in a Camus who is a ruthless figure, who has home and doesn't have home at the same time, in this kind of a dialectic, if you like, in this interesting way, Camus becomes the first man as well. And final essential things that I would like to mention before I conclude, and I just need only maybe 5 more minutes if it's okay, and then we can have a discussion, is I would like to pin down by means of this novel the ways in which poverty has shaped or just shaped Albert Camus. And as I said, there are numerous social, domestic issues that are caused by poverty and that can corrode family, society, nation, the world, and so on. But on the other hand, I really wanted to call your attention to the ways in which poverty can shape an individual, which are clearly positive and much needed. Here's a story of Camus getting into a little altercation in the 1920s, so as late teenager, if you like, an altercation between based on racial supremacist grounds. So there were blacks, there were Arabs, was fighting with one another, and all of that was governed by the French state. So here's one altercation, and this is what I want to point towards to is Camus' demeanor, Camus' honorable demeanor that he learned thanks to the privations early in his life. At the corner of the Rue Provost Paradol, a group of men were shouting, "That filthy race!" A short worker in an undershirt said, looking in the direction of an Arab standing as if glued in a gateway near the cafe. "I didn't do anything," the Arab said. "You are all in it together, all you fucking sons of bitches." And he started towards him. The other man held him back. Jacques said to the Arab, "Come with me." And he took him to the cafe, which was now run by Jean, his childhood friend, the son of the barber. Jean was there, still the same, but wrinkled, short and thin, his face sly and alert. "He didn't do anything," said Jacques. "Take him into your home." Jean looked at the Arab over while he wiped off the counter. "Come," he said, and they disappeared into the back. Jacques went outside and the worker scowled at him. "He hasn't done anything," Camus said. "We should kill them all." That's what you say when you're angry. Think it over. So Camus is a legendary thinker in many respects. And again, I think there are fascinating parallels in terms of the kind of a French character and French mongrel personality between him and Michel de Montaigne, and that's why I wanted to do originally a class bringing them together. And one of the kind of a solid and vital to handle themselves in dangerous situations in a way that results in peace or in some form of non-violence. We have too many dangerous thinkers around who can, you know, shove these risky avant-garde ideas around. But if you were to put them in a real situation, in a real risky situation, they would most probably shit themselves. Camus, on the other hand, offers you this. So this is Camus in performance in a real life situation. And if it wasn't for his childhood, for all the suffering and all the solidarity he experienced with other suffering from the same structural violence and injustice. Right, and final thing that I wanted to tell you is this one. In his very first entry to his notebooks, which Camus wrote from 1935 up until his death in 1960. So in May 1935, first entry, Camus is musing about what? It's not about women, you know, it's not about the next entry he starts discussing in the most so on. But the thing that is on his mind and on his heart is the division in the world, the division between the wealthy, or say the people who pursue wealth as well, and the poor people, simple people who actually do not care about money so much. And we must say that Camus certainly belongs to the latter category. When he received Nobel Prize and a shitload of money coming with it, he didn't buy the house, he didn't invest the money into jewelry, he didn't buy himself a copy of Gioconda or whatever. He pumped almost all of that, all of those funds into creating a play of his dream based on Dostoevsky's Possessed. And he spent all that money on a play. He was creating dangerously. For him, meanings that we can create in the everyday and rebellion mean much more than just the vicious circle of he writes in this diary, for the rich people, the sky acts a gift of nature. The heck can see as it is grace. See things clearly. I have only one. This life of poverty among these vain or humble people, I have what I feel is the true meaning of life. Not in with we think that the world is you.
Yes.
All right. I hope you heard the last words. That's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you, Dr. Valery Vinogradovs, for your presentation on Albert Camus on poverty. Now, before we throw the meeting open to questions and comments with Valery,